March 5th, 1941, 6 a.m, the Angus shops of the Montreal Locomotive Works. The air inside the massive erecting shop is colder than the pre-dawn street outside. It smells of cold steel, dormant grease, and coal smoke from the few active forges. This cavernous space, stretching nearly a quarter mile, was built to berth giants, the colossal steam locomotives that tamed a continent. But this morning, the floor is wrong, it's too empty. Foreman Angus MacLeod, a man whose hands are mapped with the scars of building railway engines, stands in the unnatural silence. His breath fogs in the dim light. Beside him stands a younger man, barely 30, in a crisp suit that looks painfully out of place. The suit belongs to the Department of Munitions and Supply. The younger man, an engineer named Harrison, unrolls a set of blueprints across a wooden crate. The schematics are stark white under the factory's weak lamps. MacLeod leans in. It is not a locomotive. It is not a boiler, not a firebox, not a driving wheel. It is a complex riveted alien thing. A hull, a turret ring, a glacis plate. It is the Ram, a cruiser tank. She's based on the American M3 chassis, Harrison says, his voice too loud in the quiet. But the British, they need a full traverse turret, and they need the driver on the right, and they need this. MacLeod doesn't answer. He just runs a calloused finger over the blueprint's notations. He taps a specification for armor thickness. We don't have the plate, he says flatly. We don't have the tooling. The presses we have are for locomotive frames, or is not this. And the men! He gestures with his thumb to the empty factory floor. The men I have no steam. They don't know this. You'll get the men, Harrison says, trying to sound confident. And you'll get the steel. Mr. Howe has seen to it. MacLeod straightens up. He looks past the engineer into the dark recesses of the shop. He's heard of this man. Howe, the American-born Minister of Everything, who was given power over the entire Canadian economy. A man who spoke not of requests, but of requirements. The foreman knew, as did every industrialist in Canada, that this demand wasn't just ambitious. It was madness, and it was born from a catastrophe that had unfolded 9 months earlier, an ocean away. May 26th, 1940, the beaches of Dunkirk. The English Channel is a placid, mocking blue. The sky's a swarm of black crosses, Stukas and Messerschmitts. You're a soldier of the British Expeditionary Force. You have been marching for 3 days. The roads choked with the burning skeletons of vehicles. The Wehrmacht's panzer divisions, which weren't supposed to be able to cross the Ardennes, have flanked the entire Allied army. The only sound, beneath the whistle of the bombs, is the rhythmic, desperate shuffle of boots on sand. You are leaving everything behind. You wade into the surf, the water cold against your wool uniform. A small fishing boat, a little ship, strains to take you and 20 others. As it pulls away, you look back at the shore. It is a junkyard of defeat. The entire arsenal of the British Army is abandoned, utterly lost. Nearly 2,500 artillery pieces, over 7,000 tons of ammunition, 80,000 trucks, transports and motorcycles, and the tanks, nearly 600 of them. Vickers, Matildas, Crusaders, all now smoking trophies for the advancing Germans. Britain has been saved, but it is naked, defenceless. An invasion seems not just possible, but imminent. From London, the telegrams sent by Winston Churchill to his dominions are frantic. He pleads not for soldiers, but for things, for rifles, for shells, for tanks. And he looks to Canada. In 1939, Canada was not a military power. It was a nation of 11 million people, mostly farmers, loggers, and merchants, still clawing its way out of the Great Depression. The standing army was a mere 4,500 men. The navy was 6 destroyers. Total military manufacturing, a few thousand rifles a year. 2 small factories made aircraft, but they produced fewer than 40 planes combined. There was not a single factory in the entire country that could produce a tank. Not one. Into this vacuum steps Clarence Decatur Howe. C.D. Howe is not a politician. He is a builder, an engineer who built grain elevators and port facilities. When war was declared, Prime Minister Mackenzie King gave him a new portfolio, the Department of Munitions and Supply. Howe is given a mandate that is simple and terrifying, to mobilize the resources of the Dominion for the prosecution of the war. He is, in effect, made the CEO of Canada. Howe doesn't negotiate. He doesn't ask. He tells. He seizes entire industries. He dictates the price of aluminum, of lumber, of steel. When factory owners tell him they lack the capacity, Howe signs an order and builds them a new factory. When they say they lack the machines, Howe dispatches agents to America to buy, or simply copy, the needed tooling. In a matter of months, 28 crown corporations are born. These are not private companies. They are entities owned by the Canadian people, created for the sole purpose of producing for the war. Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock, they will build destroyers. Victory Aircraft Limited, they will build the Lancaster bomber. And Montreal Locomotive Works, a company that has never built a single armoured vehicle, is given the blueprints for the ram tank. But blueprints are just paper. Steel plate is just deadweight. A factory is just a building. To make a tank, you need people. You need riveters. You need welders. You need machinists, electricians, fitters, and grinders. You need men and women who can read a micrometer and understand tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. Canada does not have these people. The skilled labour pool was hollowed out by the Depression. The few men who did have these skills were already enlisted or working in the frantic shipbuilding yards of Halifax and Vancouver. So, C. D. Howe's department looks to the unskilled. They look to the farmer in Saskatchewan whose fields are dust. They look to the bank clerk in Toronto who has never held a tool heavier than a fountain pen. They look to the homemaker in Verdun who has spent her life running a household, not a 10-ton hydraulic press. Back in the Angus shops, Foreman McLeod looks at the first wave of new hires trickling onto the floor. They are boys, barely 18. They are men in their 40s, their hands soft. And as to the shock of the old-timers, they are women, hundreds of them, swapping aprons for overalls. "This is what they send me," McLeod mutters to another shift boss. "How, in God's name, am I supposed to build a tank with this?" The government's plan is announced. It's seen as a joke. A 10-week training program. 10 weeks to turn a high school graduate into a master welder. 10 weeks to teach a farmhand the complexities of a tank's transmission. 10 weeks to create an arsenal. Seasoned industrialists from the United States and Britain tour the new, chaotic Canadian factories. They are polite, but their reports back home are damning. The Canadians are attempting the impossible. The scale is admirable, but the workforce is green. Production will be a trickle, not a flood. They have the will, but not the means. Expect timelines to slip by months, if not years. The impossible demand has been made. The contract sitting on the desk at Montreal Locomotive Works is for 1940 ram tanks. The contract at Canadian Pacific's Angus shops is for 400 Valentine tanks. And Britain is bleeding. Rommel is advancing in Africa. The U-boats are choking the Atlantic. The demand is not for tanks next year. The demand is for tanks now. McLeod picks up the blueprints again. He looks at the fresh, nervous faces staring at the massive, cold machinery. He takes a piece of chalk and walks over to a steel plate. "Right," he barks, his voice echoing in the vast hall. The silence is broken. "First lesson. This is not a locomotive. This is a weapon, and you will learn to build it." The great arsenal begins to stir. The sound that followed McLeod's words was not a cheer. It was the shriek of metal as the first of the new old machinery, cannibalized from automotive plants in Oshawa and Windsor, was dragged into place. The Angus shops became a place of controlled, deafening chaos. This was not a school. It was an emergency transfusion. There were no neat rows of desks, no quiet study. The factory floor was the classroom. The curriculum was written, torn up, and rewritten every single day. "You are one of the new hires. Your name is Thomas Reed, and 6 weeks ago you were an accountant for a small shipping firm. Now you're standing in front of a 40-ton hydraulic press, a machine so loud it shakes your teeth. An instructor, a grizzled veteran from the locomotive boiler shop, cups his hands and screams over the din. You don't ask the machine. You tell it. Watch the gauge. Feel the lever. Too much. You crack the plate. Too little. The bend is weak. It's not numbers. Boy, it's feel. Now, do it again. You pull the lever. The massive ram descends with a groan. The 3-inch thick steel plate beneath it does not bend. It shatters, sending a report like an artillery shell through the bay. A foreman runs over, his face purple. He He doesn't fire you. He can't. He shoves you aside, grabs a new plate, and snarls. Again. This is the 10-week miracle. It is a process of brute force repetition. In one corner of the factory, a woman named Mary Shaw, who 2 months prior was canning preserves in her Verdun kitchen, is learning to weld. The training is rudimentary. She's given a hood, a rod, and a piece of scrap plate. Make a line, the instructor tells her. Her first line looks like a string of burnt popcorn. The metal is pitted, bubbled, and weak. Again. Her second line is better. Again. For 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, she does nothing but draw straight lines of molten steel. Her arms ache, her eyes burn from the arc flash, even through the tinted glass. She smells of ozone and scorched metal. After 1 week, she is no longer making a line. She's welding a seam. After 3 weeks, she's welding hull plates. After 6 weeks, she is a senior welder, teaching a new crop of girls, fresh off the train, how to hold the rod. The speed is breathtaking. D. Howe's department isn't just training workers, it's rebuilding the factory around them. While Mary learns to weld, a crew of engineers is laying new concrete foundations for a 20-ton overhead crane right next to her station. Riveting teams practice on scrap while just yards away. The main assembly line is being bolted to the floor, the paint on its components still tacky. The tools themselves are a strange mix of old and new. Veteran machinists, men who prided themselves on custom, precision work for steam engines, are now forced to use jigs. These are massive, pre-formed metal templates that clamp onto a piece of steel. They are designed for fools. They remove the art of the job, turning a craftsman into a mere operator. A lathe operator no longer shaves a millimeter at a time. He slams the piece into the jig, engages the cutter, and moves on. The jig ensures every piece is identical. It is the birth of mass production, and the old-timers hate it. But it works. The raw materials flow in, a relentless river of steel organized by Howe's 28 crown corporations. Plates from the Dominion Steel and Coal Corporation in Nova Scotia. Engines from the Wright Aeronautical Corporation, brokered by US liaisons. Transmissions, wiring, optics. 1,000 pieces from 100 new suppliers, all converging on Montreal. And with the materials come the inspectors. They are British, men from the Royal Tank Corps, officers who have seen what a German 80 La Messerschmitt does to bad armor. They are merciless. They walk the line, their boots echoing. They carry ball-peen hammers and calipers. An inspector stops at Mary Shaw's station. She has just finished a long, critical weld on a turret ring. He looks at it. He doesn't compliment her. He taps it with his hammer. Ting, ting, ting. He takes a piece of chalk and draws a large, glaring X across her work. Inadequate penetration, he says, his voice clipped. The plate will spool when hit. Do it again. Mary feels a sting of failure, but the foreman just nods. You heard him. Grind it out. Again. There is no room for error. There is no time for ego. There is only the work. The 10-week training window is a fiction. It's not a graduation. It's just the deadline to be useful. By the 8th week, the trainees are the production line. June 22nd, 1941. It is 100 days since the blueprints were unrolled on the factory floor. The shift bell rings, but no one leaves. A crowd gathers at the end of the newly minted assembly line. Foremen, engineers, welders, riveters, Thomas Reed, the accountant, his hands now rough and stained, Mary Shaw, her overalls blackened with soot. Angus MacLeod, the old locomotive boss, stands at the front, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. At the end of the line sits a 29-ton monster. It is painted a flat, olive drab. The white star of the Allies is stenciled on its side. It is the first Ram Cruiser tank, serial number 1. It looks perfect. It looks real. A mechanic in greasy coveralls climbs onto the hull, opens the hatch and drops inside. The crowd holds its breath. A moment of silence, a cough, a sputter. Then, a sound that no one in this building has ever heard before. The roar of a 400 horsepower Wright radial engine designed for an airplane now trapped inside a box of steel. The entire concrete floor vibrates. The sound is a physical punch to the chest. The tank lurches. Its tracks clatter on the concrete. It moves under its own power for the first time. It crawls past the cheering, stunned workers. They reach out and touch the steel, their steel. Thomas Reed, the man who shattered his first plate, looks at the perfectly formed curve of the glacis plate he pressed. Mary Shaw sees the turret ring she welded and re-welded and re-welded until the British inspector finally, silently, nodded and moved on. They built it in 10 weeks. This collection of farmers, clerks and housewives had been forged into an army. They had built a machine of war. They couldn't believe it. But Foreman McLeod is not cheering. He is looking at a new piece of paper in his hand. A telex from the Department of Munitions and Supply. The first tank is a triumph. It is a miracle, but it is not enough. The telex is a new production schedule. It doesn't ask for 1 tank a week. It doesn't ask for 1 tank a day. It demands 10. The 10-week training was over. The 10-day quota had just begun. That telex, demanding tanks in 10-day batches, was not an isolated request. It was a single gear engaging in a machine so vast, it defied belief. What was happening at the Montreal Locomotive Works was happening everywhere, all at once. C. D. House 28 Crown Corporations had awakened. This was not a collection of independent factories. It was a single, continental assembly line, directed from Ottawa by a man who thought in terms of steel tonnage and production curves. The nation itself was being remade into a weapon. You're a British industrialist, Sir Charles Rowan, on a fact-finding tour in late 1941. You've come to see what your junior dominion is contributing. Your first stop was the Angus shops. You saw the ram tank. You were impressed, if a little sceptical of the quality. You noted the green-looking workforce. Now, your government handlers are taking you on a tour. You're taken to a place that, on a 1939 map, was an empty field outside Ajax, Ontario. It is now the largest ordnance filling plant in the entire British Commonwealth, Defence Industries Limited. It is a city unto itself, with 50 miles of railway track, 80 miles of roads, and 300 permanent buildings. It is staffed by 9,000 workers, 7,000 of whom are women. You watch them, in their yellow coveralls, handling tin and key, eggs, with a calm, practiced efficiency. They are not welders. They are bomb makers. They are shell fillers. They are packing the cookies, the 4,000-pound blockbuster bombs you've been begging for. You are told the plant produces over 40 million shells, mortars, and bombs every month. You check your notes. That is more than all of Britain's Royal Ordnance factories combined. Before the Blitz, you stare at the women, who you're told were farm girls and shop clerks just last summer. You write in your log. The scale is alarming. Your handlers take you west to Moulton, outside Toronto. You stand inside the Victory aircraft plant. A year ago, this company built a handful of light trainers. Now, looming over you, is the black 4-engine skeleton of an Avro Lancaster. The Lanc, the single most complex weapon of the entire air war. It has 7 miles of wiring, 55,000 individual, custom-machined parts. You watch a team of women, directed by a single, overwhelmed-looking foreman, riveting the main wing spar. They move with a speed you don't recognize. They are using North American production methods, jigs and templates that your own factories in Surrey have resisted. When do you expect this one to fly? You ask the foreman. He checks his clipboard. This one. Oh, she'll be in the air by Friday, sir. We're building one a day now. One a day. The words hang in the air. A Lancaster. A day. Your best factories are fighting to produce 2 a week. Your hands are clammy. You're hurried to the shipyards of Vancouver, or is it Halifax? It doesn't matter. The scene is the same. A forest of cranes. The constant deafening thwack, thwack, thwack of riveting guns. You're told that in 1940 Canada had 2 shipyards capable of building an ocean-going vessel. Now, 21 yards are active. You watch a corvette, a tough, vital anti-submarine ship, slide down the ways. The bottle of champagne shatters on her bow. A cheer goes up. This is the 50th corvette launched this year. The yard manager, a man who used to build pleasure yachts, tells you the build time from laying the keel to launching is now just 60 days. They are not just building corvettes. They are building frigates. They are building the sturdy 10,000-ton Park steamships, the Canadian version of the Liberty ship. They are building them so fast, they are launching them sideways into the narrow channels because there isn't room to launch them bow first. The sheer variety is what breaks your mind. This isn't a nation good at one thing, it's a nation suddenly good at everything. In Sarnia, they are building an entire synthetic rubber industry from nothing because the Japanese have taken Malaysia. In Quebec, they are refining aluminum for the entire Allied air effort, powered by newly built hydroelectric dams. They are making machine guns. They are making parachutes. They are making uniforms, boots, optics, radios, and canned food. And they are making trucks. Dear God, the trucks. You visit the Ford plant in Windsor and the General Motors plant in Oshawa. The civilian car lines have vanished. They are now producing the Canadian military pattern CMP truck. A simple, rugged, ugly, and brilliant vehicle. They're churning them out in 3-ton and 60 sequity variants in a constant, unbroken stream. By the end of the war, Canada will have produced 815,000 military vehicles, more than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Sir Charles Rowan, return to your hotel in Ottawa. You sit down with a glass of Canadian whiskey, you look at your reports, you look at the official numbers provided by C.D. Howe's ministry. You thought you were coming to see an apprentice. You have found a master. The industrialists you spoke to back in London and Detroit were wrong. They said the Canadians were green. They said the timelines were impossible. They said the civilian workforce would be a trickle. But the trickle has become a flood. Back in Montreal, the 10-day quota for tanks is met. Then it is surpassed. The factory that struggled to build one tank in 100 days is now completing 20 tanks a week. The 10-week miracle of training has been eclipsed by the 10-day reality of production. The workers, who couldn't believe they had built one tank, are now too busy to be surprised. They are focused on the next hull, the next turret, the next deadline. The sound of the factory is no longer the chaotic din of a school. It is the rhythmic, relentless pulse of a heart of steel, pumping weapons into the arteries of the Allied war effort. The tanks roll out of the factory onto transport trains destined for Halifax. They are loaded onto freighters. They begin the perilous journey across the U-boat-infested Atlantic. The workers, Thomas, the accountant, Mary, the welder, don't know where they're going. They just know they have to build the next one, but their work is about to be tested. The steel they pressed and the seams they welded are heading for the front line. The arsenal has awakened. Now it must fight. The North Atlantic, 1942. You're on the deck of a Park freighter built in a Vancouver yard that didn't exist 2 years ago. Your ship is loaded with shells from Ajax, aluminum from Quebec, and rifles from Long Branch. Lashed to the deck, coated in ice, are 20 ram tanks from Montreal. This is the arsenal of democracy in motion. The U-boat wolf packs are waiting. The journey is a 2,000-mile gauntlet of ice, fear, and sudden, violent death. A single torpedo can wipe out the work of 10,000 hands. Many ships do not make it, but most do. The weapons arrive in Britain. The tanks, the rams, the Valentines are driven off the docks by British crews. And here, the story takes a sharp, unexpected turn. The war has moved faster than production. By the time the ram tanks arrive in large numbers, the Americans have standardized their own design, the M4 Sherman. The Sherman is mechanically reliable, easy to produce, and is already the main battle tank for the Allies. The Canadian Ram, with its unique driver placement and different parts, is a logistical problem. The frontline combat divisions choose the Sherman. Was it all a waste? Was the impossible effort to build a tank from scratch for nothing? No, it was the proof. It was the proof that Canada could build a tank, that its green workforce could master the complexity of a modern armoured vehicle, and while the Ram itself would not lead the charge, its heart would. The British, desperate for mobile artillery, looked at the robust Ram chassis. They mounted their devastating 25-pounder gun onto it. The Sexton self-propelled gun was born, built in that same Montreal factory, by the same workers. The Sexton became one of the most vital artillery pieces of the war. It was fast, reliable, and it gave the infantry the instant fire support they needed to survive. Stories like this, of innovation born from desperation, are a crucial part of our shared history. If you believe these hidden stories of the war deserve to be told, take a moment to click that subscribe button. It ensures we can continue to bring this history to life. The Canadian-built Sextons would land in Italy. They would land in Normandy. They would fire millions of Canadian-made shells in the fight to liberate Europe. But the tanks and guns were only part of the story. The real miracle, the weapon that truly won the war, was quieter. It was uglier. It was the Canadian military pattern CMP truck. Those 815,000 vehicles, churned out by the converted automotive plants, became the blood and sinew of the entire Allied army. If you were a British soldier in the deserts of El Alamein, your water arrived on a Canadian truck. If you were a Russian soldier fighting at Stalingrad, your ammunition was often hauled by a Canadian truck, sent via the Arctic convoys. If you were an Australian soldier in the jungles of New Guinea, your supplies came on a Canadian truck. They were everywhere. They were the unglamorous, unstoppable workhorses that kept the front line moving. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the famous British commander, wrote a personal telex stating that the success of his entire 8th Army in Africa was only possible because of the superb performance of the Canadian-built trucks. June 6, 1944. D-Day. You're on a landing craft, crashing through the surf towards Juno Beach. That landing craft was built in a small yard on the Great Lakes. The Sexton artillery guns firing in support from the ships behind you were built in Montreal, and when you break through the German defences, the first thing you see rolling up the beach to bring the ammunition and the medical supplies is a CMP truck built in Oshawa by a woman who used to be a schoolteacher. The war is won. The great arsenal falls silent. The 28 crown corporations are sold off, privatised or dismantled. The women, Mary Shaw, and the hundreds of thousands like her, the Rosie the Riveters of the North, are expected to return to their kitchens. The men, Thomas Reed and the veterans, return to a country that is no longer the same. They had been told, in 1940, that their task was impossible. Seasoned industrialists had laughed. The world had looked on in disbelief. And in 5 years, this quiet nation of 11 million people had produced over 1.6 million rifles and machine guns, 43,000 artillery pieces, 14,000 aircraft, including the mighty Lancaster, 15,000 military vehicles, over 4,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, and 410 merchant ships and 487 warships. They did it with a workforce that had been trained in 10 weeks. They did it in factories built on empty fields. They had not just created an arsenal, they had created a new Canada, a nation that was no longer just a dominion, no longer just a source of raw materials. It was a modern, industrial power. The men and women who returned to their farms and offices, or who were laid off from the production lines, now knew what they could do. They couldn't believe they built a tank in 10 days, but they had. And in doing so, they had built their future. This massive mobilization changed the world, but it also changed the lives of the everyday people who built it. What part of this incredible story, the 10-week training, the sheer scale of production, or the Rosie the Riveters of Canada, do you find the most unbelievable? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.